There are multiple ways to create announcements in Brightspace. From your subject homepage, looking at the announcement widget area towards the top right, you could select the drop-down arrow and select New Announcement. You might choose to go to the announcement tool itself, which would open a dashboard of all announcements previously made, then select New Announcement. Alternatively, via the communication menu, you could open up the announcement dashboard with the option that sits at the top of the menu here. Or also, teaching staff can go into the subject admin area and you'll find announcements available underneath communication tools. Again, this will open the announcement tool itself and we can select New Announcement. First thing we do is provide a title for the announcement. If you are intending to direct this announcement to a particular cohort of students, you may want to consider putting the target cohort in brackets just for your own reference. So I'll put an example here. If this was going to be directed to Port Macquarie internal students, I might put PTI in there. We'll come back to that. But for the time being, I'll leave it as sample. Then you have your content for your announcement. And that gives you access to the Brightspace editor that we can build learning materials and even assessment descriptive items, etc. They can all be done using the same editor. It gives you access to the Insert Stuff tool, which means that you can take external content or objects from your computer or other locations. If you've got materials sitting in your subject offering files, they can be embedded within the announcement. You can embed YouTube clips. You could create video or audio notes, which would be embedded within the message itself. Hyperlinks, even embed code. It is worth thinking about the way in which students receive their announcements, because once you've finished sending an announcement, the students will receive it firstly as a notification email, and then when they come into their Brightspace subject site, they'll be able to see it on their subject homepage. Now, any embedded media that would not normally open within an email application on a mobile device is going to appear as a hyperlink for them, and that will bring them into the subject site. So they're not going to be able to play a video, for example, embedded within an announcement until they come into the subject site to then watch the video. So keep that in mind after you've put in your body text for your announcement. Whether or not you've used external content using Insert Stuff, or potentially you may have used also the quick link option, which will allow you to directly connect students to other parts of the subject site if you wanted to direct them towards particular assessments or particular action items like checklists or discussion forums, for example. You can use the quick link tool, but again, this requires that they actually be in the subject site. And if they're not in there already, clicking on that quick link will take them in to Brightspace. They'll be signing in and then jumping to another part of the subject site. So after we've put our content for our announcement in this area, scrolling down we can see that we have a start date, and by default the announcement will be issued immediately. So when the time at which we start composing the message. But you can change this date. So if you wanted the announcement to come out at a later point, end of the week, next Monday, whatever the case may be, you can change the date and time for a scheduled release of the announcement. So as an example, there are a number of subjects where a series of announcements will be created in advance, lining up with subsequent teaching weeks, for example, and they can be lined up using this start date scheduling. So the announcement won't be sent and the notification email won't be sent until that date and time, but by default it'll be the moment that you actually end up hitting publish down the bottom here. There's also an end date feature in here, which will mean that students, if you were to put in an end date, students would stop being able to see the announcement once a particular date had been reached. This is not selected by default, but if you wanted the announcement to disappear from student view, you would end up setting an end date as well. We have an option to add attachments to the announcement, and this is worth thinking about in the context of an email, so the notification email that students receive as well, as opposed to a file that was embedded. So if you had an attachment, let's say a PDF document or a Word document, etc., I would be choosing to add it as a file attachment down here so that it would open separately on a student's mobile device using whatever application they opened those types of files with. So you can add file attachments. You can also create either audio or video file attachments. And again, the difference is whether or not your email application is trying to open those from within the body text itself, or seeing that they're attachments trying to find a program on the mobile device that will open those files for you. This is likely to be more successful if we're talking about our more common file types. Otherwise, the students will need to be joining the subject site to experience that content. Lastly, we have an area called release conditions in Brightspace, and more often than not, these are being used to help you target communications, content, or assessment. So in the case of me wanting to send an announcement that went to a particular cohort of students, where I mentioned before, potentially if I wanted this announcement not to go to everybody, which it does by default, but I wanted it to go to a particular cohort of students, I can use my release conditions by hitting Create and Attach. The type of condition that I want to use here is to refer to the class list for this subject, so the students enrolled, and I want to point it towards section enrollment, so our cohorts of students. Once I select that option, I now have a drop down underneath which will identify all of the cohorts available for this subject. So in this case, I mentioned sending this announcement to Port internal students. I can now hit Create, and I'll see that this has been summarized at the bottom. Students enrolled as Port Macquarie internal students are the ones who meet this criteria, and that means this announcement and the notification email for this announcement will only be received by students that meet this criterion. So assuming that we've finished our announcement, I can hit Publish and that will send it immediately. I could select Draft and come back again and make changes to this in future if I needed to before ultimately publishing, or I can cancel, and that would take me out of the announcement creation dialog here. So I'm going to hit Publish. And now looking at my announcement tool, my dashboard of all announcements I've ever made within this subject, I can see at the top of the list the announcement that I just sent. Next to the title, I can see this icon that shows me that it does have release conditions attached, and that's because we targeted Port internal students. So if you've seen that icon, it just tells me that this has been targeted to a particular group of students. There's the text within the body of the email underneath, but if I clicked on the title, it would open it up within the editor again for me, and I would have the ability to make changes to the announcement if I needed to, and I could select Update after I'd made those changes, and it would resend those out, both updating the announcement within the subject site and sending another notification email to students. I'll hit Cancel here. So we've created an announcement. Students will have received that announcement in two ways. Firstly, sitting on their subject homepage, they'll be able to see it within the announcement widget, which is what we call this area, at which case they can read it and then individually dismiss it if they don't need to read it again. That does not delete the announcement, but it allows them to declutter the announcement widget on their subject homepage. We'll talk more about the announcement widget tool in a separate clip.